So they didn't mind it being slow. It's actually got very thick armour on it, but with just that one machine, the workshops were just starting a restoration program on that vehicle. And again, if you're interested, we're going to be putting that restoration on our website online so you can see how that progresses. £5,000 each these tanks cost, including the development costs. And they make about 140 of them. And apart from one little moment of glory at the Battle of Arras in 1940, when Matilda won an 8-speed, because again, infantry tank helping the infantry onto a position. They start with the Valentine having a 2-pounder gun. It's a vehicle that's actually put together by Vickers. The Army hasn't asked for it, but because they use components that they've had on other tanks, such as the suspension system, it's actually fairly reliable. And for a British tank at the time, that's quite extraordinary, because most of our tanks were notoriously unreliable early on in the war. Now, this particular example of the Valentine, it was made in Britain. Some Valentines, about 8,000 Valentines are made altogether. About 1,200 are made out in Canada. And most of those are actually shipped straight over to help the Red Army fight on the Eastern Front. The Valentine goes through a whole load of different marks, in other words, different improvements. And the one in front of you is a Mark 9. The first tank only had a 2-pounder gun on. That's about 40 millimetres. This one is a 6-pounder gun, 57 millimetres. That's the size of the hole at the end of the barrel. And they made mental or variant vehicles, bits on the top, bridge layers, flamethrowers, all sorts of things were done with the Valentine. The first floating tanks were actually Valentine conversions. Now, next one coming on, you can hear that lovely rumble. That engine in the back of this tank, this is the Comet tank. That engine finally gave British tanks a bit of welly so that they could be upped in weight and upped in speed. And that's the famous. They changed it a very little bit and then put it in a tank, and they call it the Meteor. And that gives the Comet that lovely rumbling sound because of that big engine in the back, hugely thirsty of course, being a petrol engine of that scale. But the Comet is what's called a cruiser tank. And the idea was the infantry tanks make the hole, and then the cruiser tanks were supposed to go through the gap. And early in the war, our cruiser tanks, again, they suffered from unreliability. But by the time the Comet's coming into service, in late 1944, at last we've got a good engine, and of course, the most important thing on a tank, a gun. This is a shortened version of the famous 17-pounder gun we put on the Firefly. Now, on this particular model, it's actually about 100% better than the standard 17-pounder that was put on the Firefly, the Sherman Firefly tank. And that gun, with new designed British ammunition, what they call discarding Sabo ammunition, that actually has better penetration than the famous. Again, a bit of context. This is the famous Centurion tank that a number of blokes in the audience, you probably had your dinky toy model of this famous vehicle. The Centurion, weirdly, is, when you look at it, it's actually a World War II tank. The very first models are built in the beginning of 1945. It's rushed down to Germany, the Mark I Centurion, and it misses the end of the war by 6 weeks. It goes on to be that absolute epitome of a brilliant bit of British engineering design. It has a superb gun, and it was upgunned. They started with a 17-pounder, then a 20-pounder. The basic model is right. They could upgun it, they could up-armour it, they added fuel capacity because it was actually a very thirsty tank. That was the one weakness of the Centurion. It ran out of petrol a bit too soon because it's so thirsty. They actually added an armoured petrol bowser that would be carried behind it, and it was armoured. It was always a bit of a problem, and of course you can see modern tanks still have that as a bit of an issue, which is why they often have extra fuel drums on the rear to help extend its range. This particular Centurion, it's a late model. It spent its last days as what they call an AVRE, Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers. It had a dozer blade put on the front of it. Centurions, the last version of Centurion was actually something called a beach armoured recovery vehicle. That only came out, got versions of it converted. So a fantastically successful tank, just a bit too late. to see action in the Second World War. Now the next tank coming on, again, bit of context, this one as well, this is the famous American Sherman tank. And from the Western Allies' point of view, this is the tank that basically saves our bacon. Our own tank industry, in 1940, we were building aeroplanes and bombers, obviously, to get back at the Germans, fighters to defend ourselves. Tanks fell in priority at the beginning of the war. And when the Americans come into the war in December of 1941, they've already sent engineers to Europe to look at what they think is going to be needed. The first tank they built, you can see in the museum, the M3 Grant tank, that has a 75mm howitzer in this. Imagine this like the cavalry. It was supposed to shoot through the gap and cause trouble behind enemy lines. It wasn't really meant for taking on enemy armour. And in fact, General Patton famously would actually tell off his tank crews if they started stopping their advances to engage with German tanks. He thought that was a waste of their talent. This particular Sherman, quite famous now, it's the one we lent to the Fury movie set, hence Fury on the barrel. It's the main tank, the hero tank as it were of the film. It's a later ammunition is now surrounded in its stowage compartments by water or a fluid, so that if you're penetrated, and don't forget the armour on this is fairly thin, if you're penetrated by an enemy anti-tank gun or an enemy tank, hopefully any rounds, any hot bits of metal will be put out by that water jacket around the end. That reassures the crew. Driver and radio operator are further down in the front of the vehicle. Now this particular vehicle was also captured out in Tunisia, not far from where our Tiger was captured, brought back to the UK for evaluation in the war. And you can see as well with it, it's got extra armour bolted on the front. That was the other things the Germans were quite clever at, and we took a while to learn, which is how you upgrade your tanks. Give them the capacity to have a bigger gun fitted. This started the war with a low velocity 50mm gun. This version has got a high velocity 50mm gun. Much longer, more powerful, more accurate. And extra armour bolted on the front to add to the protection levels. So again, beautiful design, completely impractical in wartime. They just didn't have the capacity to build enough of these. It's like building Rolls-Royce cars all the time. Absolutely lovely, but what's the point if in the middle of a battle what you really need is a Ford Escort? That's the problem with many of these German vehicles. And you've noticed we've taken out our kettenkrad, just to give it a bit of an airing. Again, that was captured in North Africa from Ramka's paratroop brigade that was fighting. So ladies, it's only a couple of miles an hour slower. So do remember it's actually a very, very mobile vehicle, and don't believe all the normal stuff we say, too slow, too heavy. Now coming on now is what the Germans built after the war. This is the famous Leopard tank. They start designing it, the Bundeswehr is reconstructed in 1955. They start the design process for building a tank. And this is what comes out in 1965 with Leopard 1. They start by calling it the standard Panzer. And really interestingly, the Germans decided different things than what we decided after World War II. They thought that speed, in other words mobility, was going to be more important than armour protection. So they gave it that great gun, that's the British 105mm gun on it. They gave it an MTU diesel engine, which you can hear it rumbling away, very powerful, made the tank very fast and speedy, and then they don't worry too much about armour because they think speed will be protection in itself. The quicker you are on the blue, a very different tank, but again, they build on that mobility, power the tank's got, and you can see that a very successful vehicle. Lots of countries around the world have actually got the Leopard in service, and very interestingly for all concerned as well, my betting is there's going to be a Euro Leopard.
Had it in reverse.
Beware the Tiger tank. It's Tiger Day. Never has one German war machine been so fierce. The Tank Museum, Bovington.
Deine Laterne und steht sie noch kaputt. So wollen wir uns da wiedersehen. Bei der Laterne wollen wir stehen, wie einst die Martin.
So ladies and gentlemen, just again, we'll be moving the British armour out the arena. You can see where it's heading off. It goes down the side of the Vehicle Conservation Centre. When the Tiger leaves, it will be leaving the same route but then turning left and driving along the road, and that gives people a good opportunity, we hope, of seeing the tank a little bit closer and get some photographs of it as it heads down the road into the museum. So you're very welcome to go and stand along the road and see what it's up to down there.
Frei. Es kann 3 Tage kosten, Kamerad, ich komm sogleich. Da sagten sie auf Wiedersehen, wie gerne möchte ich mit dir die Martin, mit dir die Martin. Deine Schritte kennt sie, deinen schönen Gang. Alle Abend kennt sie, doch nicht der Tag lang. Sollte mir eine Leiche stehen, wer wird bei der Laterne stehen? Mit dir, Lili Martin, mit dir, Lili Martin. Auf diesem Traume, auf der Grund, sieht sie im Traume dein verliebter Mund. Wenn sich die späten Nebel drehen, der sieht bei der Laterne stehen, wie einst Lili Marlin, wie einst Lili Marlin.
I missed the Sherman. Huh? I missed the Sherman.
the Tiger tank. It's Tiger Day. Never has one German war machine been so feared. The Tank Museum, Bovington.
Man's staring down the target.
Yeah.
And so, yourself, someone is facing the